So we're back here for the trauma talk then. So we're going to have a bit of a chat on dissociation today, and what Shell talks about shell shock. And yeah, we all know me. So I'm trauma therapist and supervisor, trainer, EMDR practitioner. And do you want to
I'm
briefly introduce yourself, Jenna?
Yeah, I'm Jenna. I am a therapist, EMDR therapist, trauma trainer, and I've worked in lots of different sectors in and around trauma. And we're going to look at the disassociation, as Dale said today, because for anyone that's working with complex trauma, this features really heavily in our work. And I think it'd be really good for myself and Dale to give you some examples in how that looks when we've got someone that's shell shocked.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first, Dale?
Yeah, okay, well, I'll go first then. So I think for me, there's something about kind of dissociation and kind of how it presents itself in the room kind of varies. And a lot can be around kind of just noticing certain aspects of it. So I think there's something around kind of the potential kind of shutdown that you might see or might experience. So often it can be around kind of clients expressing themselves quite unemotively, so not having any emotion, not having any physical sensations, kind of telling a story without connecting with kind of the content. I think is often a good sign. Another one is that physical close down about not being able to say anything.
Absolutely. So it's kind of like when we look at fight, flight, freeze, it feels as though in the room when we've got, disassociation, it does really kind of blend into our practice in different ways, that we have this real avoidance, numbness, shutdown, and even like physiologically how someone's presenting, it's almost like they're in sometimes a real freeze frame situation.
Yeah. And you can spot it, I think, often in very, very subtle ways in relation to kind of eye contact, body movement, kind of
Yes.
just how people seem kind of in the chair or in the room or kind of online with you, where there is potentially kind of that freeze response kind of coming in where they can become quite fixed in a process, or often
Yeah.
that looking down and away.
Yeah.
And I think it's also about being aware that sometimes some of the dissociative kind of things that we're seeing and noticing in the room is not always about dissociation. Sometimes we may be meeting elements about kind of neurodiversity, for instance, kind of the eye contact element of things is not necessarily something that's always connected to kind of dissociation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's that really kind of shows us that it takes us time to really understand where our client is landing when they're moving through high degrees of trauma, and then really how to build up a frame of reference and how to work with it appropriately. I think I don't know what you do with psych education, because you're the man of psychological education when it comes to, working with clients around trauma. But something that's worked for me, and then I'd love to hear what works for you, Dale, is I've had several clients in this week that have not only experienced loss, so we've got a grief process, but running parallel to it, the circumstances in and around the grief have been really, really, and I'm going to say, it's in the camp of like catastrophic trauma. So we've got these two features running alongside one another. And the response from the clients to me is, well, I don't feel anything at all. And my response to them, for them to understand what's happening to them, is if you see footage of soldiers in World War II or World War One, and you see that they have a limb blown off and they're carrying around their limb and they look as though nothing's wrong with them. And I say to them, this is shell shock, because the trauma and the immediate aftermath of what has happened to them is too big to comprehend. And we've got adrenaline and cortisol in the mix. So the body has its own journey to buffer you from it, that you will naturally try and keep it away from you, so that you, in that immediate moment and thereon after, are going to say, well, I don't feel anything at all. And I will say, this is what I call this shell shock.
Yeah. I think that describes it kind of really, really well. I suppose the way that I often approach kind of psychoeducation is around often within the first, second sessions that I'm seeing clients, I am doing psychoeducation. I'll be talking about kind of the fight, flight, freeze response. I'll be talking about the window of tolerance. And I think often what I'll do is I will bring that in when we're talking to clients, and there's elements of dissociation that are kind of showing. Depending on the degree of the dissociation, I will either bring psychoed in at that point if they're in touch with me, or if they're so in a space of dissociation, I will manage that first.
Yeah, I like what you said, if they're in touch with me, because it's down to us to use like our professional intuition about when it's really time appropriate for us to start to bring in psych ed, and start to teach them about maybe some of the processes in and around what's happening to them.
Because if they are kind of in touch with me, then they'll be able to kind of understand, their prefrontal cortex will be online. They'll be able to kind of start to make those neural pathways and neural connections. If they're in that space of dissociation to a point where their prefrontal cortex is shut down, they're in full-blown kind of fight-flight system, those neural paths are just not going to work. They're going to be disconnected from you. And no matter what you say in those moments, it's not going to make any sense. It's not going to kind of go in and support any kind of understanding. So actually, in those moments, it's about stabilizing and grounding.
I
It's
love
about
what,
regaining that contact.
because what you're capturing there in essence is something that I think that we don't talk about enough as therapists or anyone that's a frontline worker, is that in those moments when someone is disassociated, they don't have that access to this frontal cortex to understand anything. So we need to establish a foundation of safety before we start the pursuit of processing the trauma by bringing this bit back on.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where then I kind of might come in and sort of say to them about, okay, so what do you think happened there when you think about the window of tolerance? And maybe also kind of explain, okay, the reason why I did this was because this is what I was experiencing. Does that fit for you? So really offering an explanation about the interventions that I've used, why I've used those interventions, and checking out that it matches and connects with the client, because I might be off base, I might be wrong.
And it's okay for us to say that, isn't it? Because naturally, I suppose the person-centered therapist in me is always thinking, well, this is your journey, I can give you some information, but it's always down to you to see where it lands with you. It may or may not, but it's up to you what bit resonates and what bit doesn't.
Yeah. And I think also as well, what I will have had is kind of built up some tools right from, again, the first, the second session, asking, okay, what is it that supports you? What do you enjoy? What are you connected with? So I've got some tools there to be able to move the conversation potentially into a different space. So if a client is moving into dissociative state, if I'm able to mention pets are often a kind of a really useful kind of thing to talk about. Mention a pet's name. How are the pets doing? How's so and so doing? Did you take them out for a walk this morning? How are they getting on at the moment? It might be children, it might be activities or hobbies that they've done. You're totally moving into a different frame.
Yeah. I love that. I really like that's really important as well, isn't it? Because I suppose that, we can't always step into the space that the person needs to look at, and we need these like kind of buffers in and around it. How's your dog? How's life? And building up that human connection, which I know that both of us probably rely on so heavily in our work. So that real psychological contact, so that we can, when the time is right, start to go into those harder layers of the trauma.
Yeah. And if you think about it from a neuroscience perspective, what we're doing is we're supporting the autonomic nervous system to kind of start to kind of balance. We're bringing kind of elements of the polyvagal system kind of back up from dorsal vagal into sympathetic and then into ventral vagal. So we're talking about that kind of connection, which is where we want to be in ventral vagal, to be able to get the repair process, to be able to support the client, to make sense of kind of what's happened to them.
Yeah, really. There's that, and this is where we get that really magical ingredient of neuroplasticity, where the repair, even from like the neuroscience perspective, it starts to heal and we can access these sorts of features inside of like our mechanics as a human when we
Yeah.
feel safe enough to do it. And I always say to my clients, even in like the worst moments of trauma and some of the most difficult encounters that we have as human beings, we can heal, and your brain finds a way to repair some of this, and there's always that movement forward, and that is available to you when you feel safe enough to go there, and that all kind of comes into alignment.
And the bit alongside that as well is what we're building and supporting the client to kind of develop is that you talk about kind of neuroplasticity. We're talking about kind of neuroception, about understanding kind of what's going on in their body, having a sense of the experience as opposed to
Yeah.
getting lost in the
Yeah.
experience.
Absolutely, because then we're back to freeze, aren't we?
Yeah.
If we get lost in the experience, then we get those symptoms that can come and sit in and around disassociation. It's so deeply interconnected into like mind, body, emotions, if you want to be spiritual, soul. So I think that we give people agency through like the psychological education to have like a way for them to get out of the adversity or the superimposing tendencies of trauma.
Yeah, well, it creates those trauma loops.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, and you're the man of what fires wires. So,
Mm,
yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's a really good kind of, and I think that you and I could talk about this for so long. But I think if
yes.
we give people, and that's why you should come on our training, but if we give people these, kind of ingredients of understanding themselves, and I think that one of the most pivotal things for my clients is you're not alone. And actually, this is really quite normal
Hmm.
to be in this space of disassociation when you're traveling through some really difficult human experiences.
Yeah, and I think the thing alongside that, kind of before we kind of bring things to a close, that I want to say really is around that's why it's also so important to know what we're experiencing as a therapist,
Yeah.
because actually what can happen is when we talk about kind of attunement, when we talk about mirror neurons kind of coming into the mix, we can also go into a state of freeze. We can also go into a state of dissociation. We can kind of match kind of what's going on in the room. So
Yeah.
attunement can be really, really helpful. It can also be quite hindering at times as well. So if we know what's going on for us, and just the other day I was working with a client and I sort of said to a client, and I specifically moved in my chair in that moment
Hmm.
to actually
Hmm.
show them this is what I'm doing because I know what's going on in my body. I have an awareness of my experience, and I'm showing this is what I'd like you to do as well because it helps.
Yeah, it does. It really, really does help. And I think, I love what you say there, because even for people such as yourself, Dale, that's worked in trauma and the profile of it for so long, we're always learning, and we're always learning about ourselves
Yeah.
as well. And I think when we give people permission to understand that, I really love that we take away this kind of like, well, all the answers. Actually, I'm still learning, and I'm teaching you that you will always be in that path also. And it's a really good thing to subscribe to, because I think it keeps us moving in the right sorts of direction, rather than, I don't know, some of the theories say that we get to self-actualization and it's like it's done, but I don't know if this is done for most of us. I think we learn always.
Yeah, I think that's a perpetual kind of cycle and improvement, development,
Yeah.
and there isn't this kind of this ultimate plateau, and there will be plateaus within a process.
Oh, absolutely. I say life is like being attached to a heart monitor. This world will offer you ups and downs, but when you go through therapy and you get the really good psychological education on how to stabilize yourself, you become this anchor of support for yourself when you start to face adversity, because you'll know that you'll travel through it. One, two, you'll know some of the ingredients to get yourself out of it, so you don't kind of go in like to the pits of despair and depression.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's really lovely, and that actually that anchor for yourself.
Yeah, you're the anchor, and you're going to be that safe, consistent, secure space for yourself, because you'll learn how to show up for yourself, and then how to have the governance of yourself as you move through this world.
Yeah, that's lovely.
It's
Thank you, Jenna.
lovely. Thanks, Dale.